Welcome to Soul Therapy. I'm Katie.
And I'm Kate, and this is the space where we take a deep breath, dive into healing, and laugh a little along the way.
Think of this as your cozy corner for exploring how to feel better, grow stronger, and live with more ease.
We'll chat about everything from practical tools to soulful insights, all designed to help you connect with yourself and navigate life's ups and downs.
We've put together this Soul Therapy session series to help you to come back into alignment.
By alignment, we mean living with expression of your true self and values, feeling centered and grounded in yourself, and with an inner peace, trusting in the flow of life and your role within it.
So listen along and join in with the exercises, and let us know how you get on. Ready?
Let's do this.
Welcome to Soul Therapy. I'm Katie.
And I'm Kate, and today we're going to be talking about the relationships with our parents and family.
So for me, I think that relationships with parents and family, that's the foundation of our interactions with others. And for me, I think that that's where a lot of our joys come from, but it's also where a lot of our heartaches come from. It's where a lot of our challenges are born. And it's also where some important relationships for the rest of our life can be situated. So I think it's a really challenging one, particularly our relationship with our parents. It kind of begins before we even have a concept of anything other than ourselves. So we initially see our caregiver as actually a kind of extended part of ourselves when we're very small babies and very young child.
And they tend to see us as an extension of them too.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, how many times have you heard parents say, "Oh, I see myself in my child"?
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. No, definitely. And it's a challenge being kind of that connected, but also being innately separate individuals, and how to bring that forward in life, how to be our true selves, how to be our soul aligned selves, not just with that connection or through what has been funneled into us via that connection, but actually bringing forth our true self.
Right. And it's interesting to try to have that divide, right? And ask ourselves, what are we conditioned to believe versus is this truly my authentic self? Right?
It can be difficult to tell the difference between the two,
Yes.
for
Yeah.
sure. I've definitely had times where I've questioned myself. Is this me, or is this somebody else's voice coming through me?
Yes.
And it can be a bit of a shock and a surprise to find out that it's another voice coming through you. But it can also be a liberation as well. It can be a freedom to recognize that there might be a different choice, there might be a different truth. Yeah, to free the true you that was underneath that
Yeah.
voice. Maybe.
Yeah. And to be able to distinguish, like, this isn't my trauma that I need to carry. These aren't my negative belief systems that I need to carry. They were simply passed down to me, which isn't within my control. But what is within my control is whether I choose to embody them, whether I choose to continue to live based on those belief systems, or whether I choose to challenge those belief systems and create a new way forward.
Exactly, and those belief systems, those things that we're given by our initial caregivers when we're very young, um, as we don't see that separation between ourselves and our caregivers, we tend to swallow those things we're given whole. So they become so much a part of ourselves. It can be very difficult to even see them or spy them within our lives. I've definitely found things like that within me as well,
Yeah.
where it's been difficult to recognize that this is something that was instilled in me rather than maybe a trueness to where I am right now and who I
Yeah.
am right
Yeah, well, it's like they literally create our reality, right? So we tend to take them as being factual truths
now.
because as children, we don't know better. Like
Mm,
literally from the day we're born, like this what I call operating system starts forming. You know,
Mm,
the things we're hearing, the
mm,
things that we're seeing around us, whether we're getting held by our caregivers enough,
yeah.
right? Whether we aren't, like all of these things, not even just the voices, the messages,
Mm,
but literally the physical environment around us
mm,
literally starts building this operating system that eventually becomes our reality of how we see the world, right? And we
mm,
just assume it's truth because we weren't exposed to anything different.
yeah. And I think it can be kind of frustrating to then find as we grow older and older,
Mm,
that we're actually existing under a layer that was kind of placed over us. We're kind of cling wrapped, if you like,
mm,
in somebody else's kind of preservation cling film,
right.
and whether it's ours or not, those belief systems that you spoke about, whether they're ours or not, and it can be very difficult to even challenge those things as well, because it can feel
Mm-hmm.
kind of quite threatening to challenge them. I found that a lot of the things that I was given as a child were put forward as imperatives. You
Mm,
must follow this, or else there's an issue of
mm,
some kind. You know, maybe it was dangerous for you, maybe it was difficult for them, you know,
right.
whatever it is, but it must be followed. And it can be
Mm,
quite difficult to liberate yourself from that requirement to follow a belief system you were
yes.
given, noticing it in the first place, and even once you've noticed it, freeing yourself
Mm-hmm.
from it.
And especially when it becomes almost like a defense mechanism
Mm,
of some sorts,
mm,
right? Like you were saying, as children, sometimes these belief systems become instilled even more if it's a way to protect us,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah,
Like this idea of I need to present a certain way or I'm not going to be cared for by my
absolutely.
parents,
Yeah,
right?
so belonging gets chosen over authenticity
Mhm.
because it has to be, because
Mhm.
as very small children, we need that care.
We need our
Mm,
caregivers to care for us,
mm,
right? And the challenge is when, you know, these belief systems are getting carried into into our adulthood and
mm,
into our adult relationships, right? And
mm,
it's sometimes we're not able to make that divide of this was something that served me at that point in my life when I was a child, because like you said, I needed, you know, my parents to care for me.
mm,
But when we're adults, it's that recognition of, hey, this is something that developed in me sometimes decades ago that is still impacting me in my relationships today, but it doesn't have to, because now I'm a growing adult. Now I can take care of myself. Now I don't need to
mm,
depend on someone else to take care of me. And a lot of the time when these belief systems that we learned as defense mechanisms, especially as
mm,
children, start showing up in our relationships with
mm,
other family or with you know, our parents, it's that realization that I don't need to be like that anymore,
mm,
right? I'm not a child anymore. I can show up and be this way and it's safe for me, right?
mm.
Because that core
Yeah,
need of safety is what children want, right? If the child isn't safe, then they're going to conform to whatever they need to feel safe. But it's that recognition as an adult, I am safe either way, whether I choose to live like this
mm.
through this belief system or whether I choose a different way, I am safe now.
And I think in order like to be safe to change as well, to be
Mm-hmm.
safe to recognize that some of those things, those
Mm,
belief systems we carried and actually we enacted in our lives, that they aren't ours, and to recognize within that that um, we aren't actually berating ourselves, we aren't actually telling ourselves that we're wrong.
mm,
Instead, what we're doing is we're really recognizing, as you said, that at that time, these belief systems that we took in
mm-hmm.
were good for us for some reason
They
or
served a
other.
purpose.
Yeah, they served a purpose
Mm-hmm.
at the time. And if they no
Mm-hmm.
longer serve a purpose, that's okay. It's okay to let them go. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay to recognize them. It's okay. We don't need to put ourselves down for having
Mm-hmm.
had them.
Right.
Mm,
Yeah, it's that acknowledgement of it served a purpose at one
mm,
point, right? But it doesn't mean that it still serves a purpose now,
mm,
right? And that thinking of that you need to continue to carry these belief systems
mm,
is usually when it can hinder someone's growth, because a lot of the time, these belief systems that we inherited, I know personally for me, one of them was you need to work hard to make money. If you're not working hard, you're not going to make money. So, and this fits in really well with kind of this hustle culture that we have, right? That continually got reinforced, not just with my parents and my family, but in the world around me. I also saw that, right? So as an adult, I was learning to challenge that belief of actually, it's not always about working harder. It's about being in alignment with my authenticity and my authentic self. I can actually make just as much money by being my authentic self. It has nothing to do with needing to work my ass off.
So that was one of those belief systems that you swallowed whole, basically.
Yes, and I totally embodied it. And for the longest time, like all throughout my 20s, it totally impacted my life and how I showed up before I was just like, wait a second, like, where did this come from? And is it actually the ultimate truth? Or is it something that I just inherited from my parents, from grandparents, that I actually can just say, I'm choosing not to believe that anymore. I'm going to choose to believe this instead. And this alternative belief was actually more in alignment with supporting my goals.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I think one of the belief systems I swallowed whole was the idea that something wasn't for people like us. So there was many things that would come up in life, and that was for other people, but it wasn't for us. And yeah, I took that one in, and I thought there were things in life that just weren't for me or for people like my family. And I think one of the things that really helped me to work through that was to recognize that that was a belief system I was given by parents and grandparents, but actually that was probably a belief system they inherited again from their parents or grandparents before that. So these belief systems aren't always things, in fact they aren't often things that people are trying to instill into children, that parents and families are trying to pass forwards. These are things that feel like they have to be passed forward in order to create safety and security, or they're being passed forward subconsciously. There's interesting things in families. For example, being quick to anger. Being quick to anger is a trait that you can often see passed from parents to children. And you can often see when children, even when we're out, right? If we're in a supermarket or on the street, we can see that if a child is quick to anger, the parent is often quick to anger back. And so this is a learned trait. So these things are being passed through families, not necessarily with intention, but because they were swallowed whole by the parent from maybe their parent or grandparent, they're then passed onwards. So there's a lot in this in relation to just being with what you swallowed from your family, I think, what you were given, without necessarily rising to fixate on blaming them for that, and fixate on kind of handing off that responsibility for that. What do you feel about that?
That's the thing. A lot of the time, actually, like 99.9% of the time, it's not intentional, right? Like our parents didn't intentionally teach us this, so it would hinder our growth, even though it potentially does, right? It's like that's generally not the intention of parents, and it is this generational thing, right? And it gets passed down. It can be passed down for centuries, from generation to generation, until you have that one person who is just like, hold on, where did this come from? Is it the actual truth? Is this like the truth of our existence? Or is this something that I was just taught because it's been blindly passed down to me, right? And until you have that one person in the family who is like, starts questioning these truths, I mean, it can continue for generations, right?
Definitely. I've heard of that person in the family called the black sheep.
The black sheep.
But the curse breaker, I prefer the term curse breaker. So yeah, I often felt to myself that maybe I was a black sheep, maybe not the black sheep, but I was
Hence our
a.
black
Yeah,
elephants.
I
I
know.
see this was speaking of subconscious, unconscious. We totally wore black today, probably because we're the black sheeps of our family, right? We were those people that stood up and were just like, hold on here, like pump the brakes. Am I going to continue this cycle, or am I going to be like, hey, no, it doesn't have to be this way anymore, and I'm going to create a new way for
exactly.
generation
But
to
I
come.
do really like, I mean, while I still think it's fantastic and it's awesome to be a black sheep in a family who just kind of strikes out for another way and changes it up, I think also just the reference to it as a curse breaker, I think really is something that kind of sets people free from having given you that issue. It sets people free. It kind of, you look back and you say to yourself, well, you know, actually I can draw some peace in the fact that I am breaking this curse.
Yes.
And I can draw some peace from the fact that maybe they didn't or couldn't for whatever reason, and so they passed it on to me.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, curse breaker, I like that one. I prefer
I
that
like the
one.
curse breaker better too, because I feel like the black sheep, it's always used in like a negative way, like, oh, they're the black sheep, like, you know, they're almost like you have to shun the black sheep because they don't conform to what we want them, right? And it's like, but it's, yeah, it's flipping that around and being like, no, it's those curse breakers, it's those black sheep that actually drive the change in families, that actually can change centuries of generational curses and be like, hey, no more. So I mean, really, you know, it's actually something to be proud of.
Completely.
To be a curse breaker, or to be a, so to speak, like a black sheep. Like, it's, I mean, you've been given that role for a reason, and to actually fully embody it and not feel shame about it, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. I absolutely agree with you on that completely. So it's kind of reaching a point then where you can recognize what's coming through you and take a moment to notice whether is it me, or is it something that's been given to me? Is it me, or is it them? Who is it that's speaking through me? And sometimes this can be really easy, right? Sometimes we say something and we can almost literally hear the voice of the person in our head who actually would have said
like,
it that way.
That's grandma.
Yeah,
that's dad. Like, that's mom. Like, that's auntie so and so. Like, you can literally hear it.
Yeah, you can hear it come through, and you can hear it in their voice and their intonations and everything. They're kind of little foibles that they're adding to it. They're little twists that they're putting on things. Yeah, so then it can be kind of easy, but sometimes it can feel a bit more standard, and it can be a bit more difficult to connect with, I think, who it is. Is it me, or is it someone else? And I guess at that point, even just noticing that I'm not sure was helpful for me. Because then I started to notice, when I noticed and it was definitely someone else, then it was clear. But when I noticed and I wasn't sure, what I started to notice was how often that came up in me. And I also started to notice whether it was something I wanted to cultivate, like something I wanted in my life, or something I wanted to be, or was it something I wanted to choose not to be? Was it something negative that I wasn't enjoying being that, or the outcome that was bringing me? Or maybe were people around me kind of suffering because I was like that?
Exactly. Yeah, and that's another thing to remember too, is like, not all of our belief systems are quote unquote bad, or things that we don't want to take with us. Like, some of the belief systems we inherited are also helpful, right? So it's just that acknowledgement of, is this a belief system that's serving me or not? Right? Because sometimes, you know, maybe it is, and then carry that with you. It's really looking at the belief systems like, is this belief system helping me get closer to my goals? Is it helping me get closer to the life I want to create? And if it isn't, then it's time to reframe that belief system to literally better support your goals, because it's just continuing a cycle that you really don't want to, and that we don't need to.
And I find when I'm talking to people about belief systems and how they can notice them in their own lives, sometimes people have a bit of confusion about, how am I going to notice a belief system? How do I work out what are my belief systems? And I usually try to get them to look to see, is there anything where it has to be this way? I have to do it like this. It has to be like this. I can't do that. Is there any strong imperative words? It should be just like this. It must be just like this. Because at that point, then you can look beneath those words and see what it is that's the rule or the law that you're following. And is that rule or law true, and is it yours? And if not, whose is it?
Exactly. Yeah. And looking at or identifying our belief systems can be helpful in identifying kind of the thoughts we have too, like a certain thought that we have, like this idea of, well, again, kind of like if I don't work hard, I'm not going to make enough money. Or if I'm not making enough money, it's because I need to work harder. Right. So that's kind of, it's a thought, but it's also traces back to a belief system, right? So sometimes it can be easier to start with our thoughts. Like if you're having a thought and then it doesn't feel good to you, right? Then it's like, okay, this is a sign. This thought is not feeling good. Let's stop now. Let's analyze. Where is this thought coming from? Is this a true thought? How can I reframe this thought, right? So a lot of the time it can be identifying based on feeling. Like if you're having a thought or a belief and you just don't feel good about it, that's kind of a sign as well to stop and start examining that belief system and whether it's actually serving you. Because if it isn't, it's time to get rid of it.
Well, yeah, because actually belief systems can also be our own. We're creating our own belief systems. So it's not just that our parents are giving us belief systems. It's not just that family are giving us belief systems. We're actually actively creating our own as well. So it can also be true that we've created our own and we don't like them anymore. Or we've created our own. So it's really, really common that we'll create our own as children. And those belief systems we create as children then will stay with us because they were useful then, but they're not useful anymore as adults. So we can create belief systems in one particular part of our life, in school or early in a job or something like that. And that can again come through our life with us, but it might not be useful. We can create belief systems while we're dating and take them into marriage.
Exactly.
All of these things, create them in marriage and take them into our next dating relationships, maybe after divorce. So all of these things we need to potentially notice and readdress our belief systems if we want to be able to choose change and grow.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing that was just like coming to me when we were talking about this was when I've done this work on myself around like really examining my belief systems. When I've done it with clients, sometimes like the first feeling that comes up is almost like a blame. It's like, well, I got that from my parents. And like, it's really like that recognition of like all this work that we do on ourselves. It's like, it's not to blame anybody, kind of like going back to like what we were talking about, like that wasn't their intention to try to make your life difficult or like to get in the way of your goals. But it's, you know, it can be so easy to try to blame like our parents or family for having these belief systems. And what I try to remind myself is, well, the one, it wasn't their intention. And then using that to be like, you know what, I've recognized this for a reason. And maybe I am that curse breaker. So, you know, alchemizing that into, I'm going to change it now. Now I'm going to use this as a springboard to help me grow more, to help me transform, to help me no longer pass these unhelpful belief systems down to another generation, down to my cousins, down to like anyone else in my family.
And I think also it's about recognizing what was good as well. It's about not fixating on the negative because as we said actually in the first episode, we can sometimes fixate on the negative because of the biological restraints of evolution. So evolutionarily, it was actually more successful for us to focus on the negatives because it enhanced our survival potential. So we focus on negatives as a species. But we can actually choose. We can use our active choice to notice the good things about it too. So getting stuck in those negatives and stuck in that blame is not really helping anybody. Creating that victim narrative doesn't actually help to create the chosen future that you want.
Exactly.
So drawing yourself out of that victim narrative, and drawing yourself away from the thing that we call learned helplessness. So that idea that you're not actually helpless, that yes, there was an issue that was passed on to you or that you don't want to carry when you were much younger and when you were potentially helpless. However, as an adult human being, you are most likely not helpless.
Right.
And so certainly not in the same way as you were as a child. So it's about kind of recognizing what you've got going for you now, the agency, the capacity that you've got going for you now that you maybe didn't before. And again, recognizing that with compassion, not negative. It was, you know, we've all gone through childhood and it's got its beauty and its challenges. But actually coming through that and recognizing, but as an adult, that isn't an issue for me anymore.
Right.
I don't need someone else to put a roof over my head.
Right.
I don't need someone else to decide what I eat. I now have agency in these things, and it's my choice going
exactly
forwards.
Yeah, and I think not staying in that victim narrative is so important, right? Because when we're in a certain narrative that's kind of that low vibration, it's like, what is that going to attract to you, right? So really learning to alchemize these kind of lower energy frequencies into something higher is so important. It's like you can acknowledge it and you can feel it, but then what can I do to get myself out of it? Because staying in that narrative and that mentality is not going to attract anything positive.
Right? And I always like to think of it as, rather than just looking at low and high, I like to think of it as having an ability to tolerate or exist within a breadth, a width. So it's more like a wide energy. So being able to, on the one hand, recognize the things that are maybe less desired, and on the other hand, recognize the things that are more desired, and being able to flow between them, because this isn't a one-way flow. Very rarely is anything in life a one-way flow.
Right.
Life has its challenges, it has its ups and downs. So we might find that something happens and we're heading back towards the other end of the spectrum that we don't want to be in. And that's absolutely okay. It's not about always maintaining what's sort of as high energy. It's rather the ability and the capacity to recognize where you are and to re-attain and re-choose, reselect, recreate for yourself that change from where you don't want to be to where you do want to be.
Exactly.
So that's why I like to think of it as that, because as you attain and as you exist as you want to in those higher energies, if you like, it doesn't mean you're never going to experience the others or see other people, or they're going to bring them into your life, that kind of thing. So, and it kind of allows us to have a little bit of grace and patience with others when we recognize all is equal and we can move from one to the other. And it can happen in a day, it can happen in an hour, it can happen in a minute. The transition from one to the other, so the transition from feeling low, if you like, to feeling high, actually gets quicker and quicker the more you work on yourself. So, and being able to tolerate two things at once, more than one thing at a time. So being able to tolerate that lower energy in a day at the same time as not letting it take the whole day from you.
Exactly. And I think this kind of ties into what we were talking about yesterday on self-awareness, right? Like all of this comes into self-awareness. Like if we're not connected enough to our body and our feelings, we're not even going to recognize when we're potentially stuck in one place or another and we're resisting that flow, right? Like you said, it's all about that flow. And so often when we don't have that self-awareness, like this used to happen to me before I developed more self-awareness, is like getting stuck on this side and being stuck for like a day or two and realizing you don't have to be stuck though. Like the more you can just acknowledge, okay, I am like not feeling in like emotionally in a good place right now. It's okay. It's temporary. I know this will pass. Like the more you can just be with it fully, the quicker actually you can flow back into here. Right?
And we can cultivate that flow by actually getting in contact with the wholeness of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So as we spoke about last session of
Yeah.
soul therapy, getting in contact with that essence of ourselves. And we can do that by recognizing what we enjoyed as a child maybe, but no
Mm-hmm.
longer doing. So things drop off in our lives,
Mm-hmm.
right? As we move through life, for some reason, we stop doing a lot of the things that maybe we once really enjoyed. Sometimes it's perfectly aligned that we stop doing them. It's perfectly in sync with where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we stop doing certain things and we don't want to start them again.
Yeah.
But it's really good to just give it a go. Have a think about things that you used to do as a child. And what do you miss from, is there anything you miss from being a child that you haven't done?
I've started doing it, but for the longest time, so when I was a child, I loved playing in playgrounds. Like we could not walk by a playground, we could not drive by a playground without me needing to stop. Like we'd be like going 100 miles down the highway and I'd be like, playground. And we'd have to like literally turn around and go to the playground because I just loved going to playgrounds. And I used to love playing on the swings. And then when I like got older, I would walk by the playground and I'd be like, oh, that's just too weird. Like I'm an adult now. Like people are gonna like judge me if they see, you know, like a 30-something-year-old swinging on the swings. I'm like, they're gonna think I'm creepy. Like I don't have a kid. Like, you know, and I was like getting caught up in like all these thoughts. And then one day I was just like, you know what? Fuck it.
Yeah.
I am going and I'm playing on the damn swings because it makes me happy. And like I started like practicing inner child work, right? Like that was a part of my own healing was to connect back to my inner child. So to let the judgments of others just not control me and to go and play on the swing. And the funny thing is no one ever said anything to me.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Like I don't even think like anybody cared enough about me and what I was doing to even judge me. Right. And that's the other thing. Like everyone is like so caught up in their own world. Like I'm not that special to them. They're not even thinking about me. They're not wondering what I'm doing on the swings. They don't honestly care, most people.
So we assume that people are caring about us, but actually they're not really paying any attention. We're all the center of our own world.
We're all the center of our own world. So like we think people are going to care way more than they actually care.
I think as well, there's something I recognized a long time ago that really, really helped me in life is that I am not responsible for the version of me anyone else carries within them.
I like
so
that.
Everybody we connect with, everybody that we interact with, everyone carries a version then of us that they've picked up within their mind. And that's their version of you. That's not necessarily you or the fullness of you. So even I've got a version of you in my mind and you've got a version of me.
Exactly.
Okay? And I can't be responsible for that version you carry.
Exactly.
You know? So you can just, you're responsible for yourself only. And when they pick up a version of you, if they see you swinging on the swings and they think, idiot, like let them. I'm not saying they're going to. I'm not saying they're going to, but what I'm saying is that they're not responsible for it because they don't know the wholeness of you.
Yeah, exactly.
So because one of the things for me, one of the things that I picked up that I had dropped was art and making up stories, creating stories.
Huge,
I had stopped. I loved it as a child. I absolutely loved to create stories and I loved to create artwork. And the thing is that I had just stopped, just flat out stopped. I had succeeded in academic environments and it's very easy to get a tick box for something when you repeat something academically. And creativity just didn't seem to be fostered in the same way. And so what happened then was that I just faded towards academia and faded away from any creativity. And it just became the standard. And you know, no, not everything I write is fantastic. And no, certainly not every time I put a pen to paper is the artwork amazing. But I'm enjoying it.
Exactly.
And that's the main thing. I think it's to liberate that little you, that inner child, and to let them play and let them explore. I also think trying things that you've never tried before that you maybe wanted to.
Yes,
or you
that you
feel
didn't get
lilting,
to do.
lifting joy. that when you think about it, I know that I get a lifting joy every time. I can think of smiling thinking about it. I get this lifting joy every time I think about kite surfing. And so every time I see people kite surfing, or a video comes up on my newsfeed or whatever, I just get this joy, this lift. And so there's this inner child inside me being pulled towards just giving it a go. And am I going to be great at it? I tried it once in the past, and you know what? I both wasn't as good at it as I'd hoped, and I wasn't as bad at it as I feared. So which is often the case. So that really seems to me like something my inner child wants to have a go at.
It's literally one of the most healing things we can do. And that idea of getting to do things now as an adult that you didn't get to do as a child. Like for me, that was traveling. And like how I lived it as an adult. Like I traveled as an adult, right? And it was one of the most healing things I ever did, because it was something I always wanted to do. And like, again, speaking of, when you're a child, you don't have as much control, but when you're an adult, you do have that control. You can create things for yourself. You do have that agency, right? So like, I just like travel, for 5 years almost, just nonstop traveling. And people are like, what are you doing? Like crazy, like you need to slow down and like get a job. like, no, like I'm doing my inner child work. Thank you. I'm going to travel until I don't want it anymore. And like, it was like no regrets. It was like one of the best things I ever did. And it's because it related to my inner child. It was one of those things I wanted to do that I didn't get to do. Right?
Yeah. And this really equates to something I've realized in life, which is being 100% in whatever you're in at the time you are in it is the best way not to have regrets going forwards. So like you said, if you're wanting to travel to a new place once a week, you get in there and you do it.
Like go and do it. Like
you make it happen. But it's kind of recognizing that maybe that won't last forever as well.
Exactly.
But being 100% in it when it does happen that way. So that you've done it and you've enjoyed it and you've lived it to the fullest.
Exactly.
And you're okay when that idea leaves you, when that feeling leaves you. You're not clinging to it, chasing it, trying to catch hold of it and drag it back.
And that can also be a sign that you healed that part of your inner child.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Right? It's like this desire that I had it kind of like just naturally slowed down. And I never actually made that connection that it could have just been because that part of the inner child of me healed. And then it dropped off, right? So it's like that idea of enjoy it while you do it, because it might not last forever and you might not want it to last forever.
Exactly.
Right? And knowing that, like, if you're doing something and it's like, well, I guess I can't live this life forever. I can't travel the world forever. I need to get a job and pay bills and blah, blah, blah. But it's that acknowledgement of it probably won't last forever. Because if you just see this as an opportunity to heal a part of yourself, if you're feeling called to do something, it's for a reason. And it could literally be your body calling you to heal a certain part of yourself so you can evolve. So you can progress to the next level of life, right? So for me, I did it until it naturally ended. I didn't even put like a timeline on it. I was like, I'm just going to listen to my body and my feelings and I'll know when it's time to stop.
Also, that kind of living that part of your life, it's not necessarily actually doing something like that can be healing for your inner child, but maybe it's just where you're at right now. And so if it's where you're at right now, even if other people don't understand it, it's okay. If family or parents don't understand it, it's okay to actually live that to the fullest as you want to. You don't have to mirror what other people expect of you. And I think that's a freedom as well. And I think sometimes what happens as well is that what they're passing on to us through maybe suggesting we might be doing the wrong thing, when parents or family suggest that, I think what they're concerned for us. There's a lot of love, and they are looking to see if we're okay a lot of the time. So it doesn't always have to be coming from a negative place. It can be that they're looking to check on us and see if we're all right, see if we've thought about that kind of thing. I know that my mum actually said to me several times through life, we were talking about, she'd ask me about children, and then she'd say, don't forget to have them if you
Mm.
want them.
Mm.
And so that's a really interesting way to think about that, because
Mm.
it's not an idea that you must or you should. It's an
Yes.
idea that you should consider potentially, do you want to?
Right.
Because otherwise maybe there will be time and maybe there won't. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
those kind of, sometimes those things, as you can see in that way, it came with like from a place of
Mm-hmm.
potential concern.
Yes.
So it might be that she desired me to have children as well. I'm not saying it
Right.
was 100% from a place of
Yes.
concern. It
Exactly.
might have
Yeah.
had self-interest there too.
Right.
She might have wanted a grandchild that way too. But at the same time, there was a level of concern that
Yeah.
maybe I was missing out on something that I might want to do. So I think we
Mm.
can give people a little bit of grace. We can give
Yeah.
people a little bit of space in that.
Yes.
And I think we can all turn around and think of something right now that maybe we loved in our childhoods, maybe we enjoyed.
Mm.
We've talked about ours, so I don't know what yours are, but maybe you've got some ideas of things that you could pick up and go away and take on. Maybe it's something, some art, like I said, or some writing, some creative writing. Maybe it's jumping on the swings, like Kate said.
Yes.
It
Going to
could
the
be many other
playground.
things. Yeah, it could be many other things.
Let that
Maybe
inner child out to play. Yes.
brilliant.
Yes.
So I think it's also about working out the difference, kind of what is being coming from our true self and what is coming from others, from our parents and from our family,
Mm-hmm.
and then working towards forgiveness, not just for the family that we're thinking of, and not just for our parents, but also for ourselves. That kind of forgiveness for having chosen a path or spending sometimes decades responding in a way that doesn't actually feel true to us and maybe never did.
Mm-hmm.
Finding that forgiveness, because otherwise we can get quite locked up in, if not issue with others, then
Yes.
issue within ourselves.
Yes.
And so I think the first thing to say is, because when I was looking at forgiveness, I recognized that I did not initially, when I first started looking at forgiveness, I did not know the whole of what forgiveness really was.
Yeah.
I had assumed that forgiveness essentially was to say, yes, that was okay. And that's not at all what it is. It's not at all. And when I started to realize that years ago, when I was looking and I started to realize that, I was able to then recognize that forgiveness is not about saying that was okay. It's not about saying that was right.
Yes.
It's not about saying that should happen again. Forgiveness is actually about saying, I'm not going to carry this anymore. I'm going to let this go.
Yes. Yeah.
So do you have any things that have come up in your life where forgiveness has been a challenge, but you've worked through it?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that was just forgiveness of myself for the longest time. Kind of, I was in that phase of my life where I was just checking the boxes, right? Like, go to school, get a job, get that 9 to 5 job, get the house in the suburbs, get a car, find a man. And I was living this life, and it was all just conditioned. It was not my authentic self at all. And I had to go through a lot of forgiveness of the fact that for so long I was actually not living authentically to myself, right? So that did involve an element of self forgiveness, and also kind of like you said, in relation to, like, I feel like the word forgiveness can sometimes be met with like defensiveness, because if someone says to you, oh, well, you need to forgive someone, or forgiveness, it's like, well, I don't know, I'm not approving of what they did. I'm not okay with what they did. And like, society really seems to attach forgiveness with approval. So like you said, it's like so important to recognize it does not mean what happened to you is okay. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with acknowledging the fact, and this ties into compassion too, right? And sending compassion to yourself if you're working on self-forgiveness, or forgiveness to others if you're working on, forgiving someone else. That it's that idea also that that person doesn't have to be in your life either.
Yeah,
right?
that's true. That's very true. So I mean, I know there are a lot of people who have difficult relationships with their family and with their parents, and who maybe wished that they had different relationships with their family and their parents. But we are also talking about radical acceptance. So this idea that you're going to see somebody and something truly 100% as it is, and recognize where it comes from. Is it true to you, or is it of someone else that's been given to you? And so at that point, another thing that we can radically accept is actually the truth of how we want to move forwards. Because we don't always want to keep people in our lives. And we have the right to choose one way or another. And in that, we can both forgive them as we let them go, and we can forgive ourselves as we move away from our interaction with them. So I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind, that a lot of people, hopefully a lot of people we're speaking with, actually have fantastic interactions with their families, or have mostly decent interactions with their families, and just one or two issues they want to deal with. But there are a lot of people who do have to consider cutting ties with one or several family members. And, you know, I can personally really understand how difficult that is from my own personal experience. And I want to recognize that it is okay either way, whether you decide to continue with someone in your life or whether you decide to let them go from your life. Either way, it's okay. But definitely forgiveness is a really important and valuable thing for you to go forward with, because it's not about setting them free, it's about setting yourself free from the tie to them.
Absolutely. Yeah, very beautifully said, right? And it can be such a contentious issue of cutting ties with family. Like all of these kind of sayings that we hear, blood is thicker than water, you only have one family. And like all of these things that come up in society that, again, maybe we should start questioning that, right? Because, you know, you can hear family say that, but then belief systems, I think, even become stronger when we hear family say it, and then when it's reflected to us in the larger world around us, they become even more enforced, right? Because it's like, how can you step outside of that and see anything different? So it's like challenging these things, right? And what I always say to people in my life, and what I've applied to myself personally, is it doesn't matter if it's friends or family or anyone, is this person good for my mental health? Or, you know, did this person hurt me in a way that at this point I can forgive them, but it's not safe for me to even have them in my life? That's okay. And it doesn't matter if it's blood related or not.
I think it's also about repetition. I think and a trend towards continuing to repeat, or whether there is actually any chosen trend in the individual we're speaking of, so in the person you're connecting with, to actually create any change, any positive change. So I think that that's a really important element of it too. Of course, people's circumstances range from, you know, relatively easy to deal with all the way through to criminal or extreme or even dangerous circumstances. So every individual needs to make their own choice about that, and how, and obviously it is important to try and create a safe environment for yourself to make that choice. But I definitely think if there is a repetitive problem where someone shows no sign of wanting themselves to move towards chosen change in a good direction, then I actually think that at that point that's a massive flag to say maybe you need to have a think about how the relationship is going to go forwards with this person, how the connection, even if that person is very close to you, so a parent or family, I think it's really important then to just bring that into your thought process and to allow yourself to forgive yourself for having that thought process where you recognize your own struggle and the issues and the fears or the difficulties you're having. To just allow yourself to feel that.
Yes, and realizing, you know, sometimes the alternative might not be needing to cut the individual out completely. Maybe it's just imposing really strong boundaries on how often can I see this person, in what frequency can I see this person before it starts impacting my mental health.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I think recognizing always that if something changes, when you bring in those boundaries, if something changes in the other person, recognizing that while we would love for the other person to be truly changing, the real action that might be happening is that they are reflecting a change based upon the boundaries you've brought in.
Right.
So essentially, their change is beholden to your boundaries. So if you remove your boundaries, they will renege, they will go back on their change.
Right.
So you can also potentially gently trial that by giving a little and seeing if they step forward to take a lot. But I would say that for me, one of the healthiest methods I've found going forward is just, if they're healthy boundaries, then I just keep the boundaries.
Yeah.
So if it's a healthy, and when we talk about boundaries, we're talking about the choices we're making and what we're allowing other people to do in our lives. So have you got some examples of boundaries, healthy boundaries that you've put into your life?
Yeah, I think with boundaries, it's one of them would be the frequency of messaging. With family members, right? And that idea that you're not available all the time, right? And I think in the world of social media and always having our cell phones on us is this expectation that we should respond right away. Right. So yeah, that boundary for me was like, I'm not always going to be available to respond right away. Doesn't mean I'm not safe. I'm okay, but I'm doing other things. And this expectation of needing to respond right away, it's not helpful for me, because, if I didn't set that boundary, it would have been resentment. Right. And that's a good indicator to know if you have weak boundaries is, are you starting to get resentful of your family? And if you are, don't blame them. Stop and reflect and say, what boundaries can I put in place to protect myself and this relationship?
Where can I make a choice? Because even when things look to be all beyond our control, there's actually always somewhere where we have choice about it some way. It might only be choice about how we react to it or respond to it. It might only be choice about how we decide to interact with it going forwards. But there's always a point at which we have choice, and looking, that's really saved me a few times, is reminding myself to look for my choice. Where do I have choice in this situation? Where can I make a chosen impact on this? Where can I choose my way forwards in relation to this?
Beautiful.
Definitely. So I think as well, identifying those belief systems, what would you recommend for people when they're at home and they're trying to identify what their belief systems are? It can be a challenge for people to identify their belief systems.
Yeah. Well, again, kind of going back to earlier in the session, when we talked about thinking about some of the thoughts you're having, and if you get that icky feeling and you don't feel good about it, or you feel sad or frustrated, stop, write that thought down and really look at it and ask yourself where it came from. Why am I thinking this? And how can I reframe it? Because the best way to start identifying those core beliefs is really through our thought processes and the thoughts that we're having every day.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, they can definitely, everyone can really notice then through that what their belief systems are, and just recognize, who do they come from? Are they given to me? Are they mine? And if they are mine, or if they're given to me, are they positive? Are they something that I want going forwards? Or do I want to challenge this? Do I want to incorporate a new belief system going forwards instead?
Yeah. And if they aren't expanding you, if they aren't working towards your goals, that's probably a good sign that it's time to reframe.
Yeah, that's very, very true.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us on this session of Soul Therapy.
And we look forward to seeing you in the next session.
Thanks for joining us. We'd love to connect with you live in our group sessions.
Join our online membership to spend weekly group sessions with us, where we will be talking about topics such as depression, anxiety, burnout, relationships,
family problems, and addictions as we work with you to develop your health and well-being.
In addition, this includes access to a private Telegram group, weekly actionable exercises with guaranteed general feedback from us. The 12-week membership comes with an exclusive offer of reduced price one-to-one sessions with us for the duration of the 12-week membership.
A lot can change in 12 weeks. Come and join us and jump into the life you choose.
Remember that to get the most out of these soul therapy sessions, whether the free podcast series or the membership, we advise full participation in all the suggested exercises.
Throw yourself into this fully and become the you that you have always dreamed of being.